You know, we just keep covering films with triple production, don't we? I actually wrote down a bit of a timeline here. This is very rough, and there is, as always, some conflicting information, so take all this with a grain of salt. Edward Neumeier reportedly saw a poster for Blade Runner and was like, dude, a cop, that's a robot, that's a great idea. In fact, apparently he cared about this idea and pushing this out so much that he actually turned down a VP job at Universal. He was story editor at the time. Meanwhile, a gentleman named Michael Miner was a guy who was a writer doing music videos. He was also, however, fresh out of film school. And so, as per Universal's usual approach, there was a bunch of tapes from film grads who showed up on the desk of Edward Neumeier, which led to the two meeting and talking about this RoboCop thing. And, maybe we could work together on this. So they workshopped it. They put it together. They got a script and then a second script. And they're like, all right, I think we got something worthwhile here. Why don't we shop this around, see if we could get a director interested? There were quite a few directors they reached out to. Paul Verhoeven, who nowadays is fairly well known, here in the States, I should clarify, wasn't really known here in the States back in the day, since, this was effectively his first real attempt to get into Hollywood. What's funny is he apparently didn't even really read the script. He just read part of it and was like, this is dumb. Threw it away. Now, as it happens, his wife read the script, from the trash, apparently, I'm just presuming here, and was like, wait, there's some good stuff here. And Verhoeven was like, well, I do like blowing people's hands off, so here we go. Sure, let's go ahead and do it. Meanwhile, they wanted to pull in someone to play the role of RoboCop, but they needed someone of a completely different physical build than they otherwise had. In fact, there was a lot of talk they were going to pull in Schwarzenegger. Remember, this is not that long after Terminator. I should mention, by the way, that this was pushed over to Orion, not Universal, because nothing makes sense. But you're probably thinking, well, what does Orion have to do with anything? Terminator. Now, I haven't covered Terminator in depth, but I do know that Orion didn't give Terminator support, and as a consequence, Terminator, the first film, didn't actually do all that well. And it should have, because it was a good film. It was something that really caught a lot of people. So, they regretted that, and it has been noted by several people, again, I haven't done the research myself, but it has been noted by several people, that after Terminator, Orion kind of changed their filmmaking policies a bit to try and, actually do better. And by several accounts they did, including with this very film. So they actually put support behind it. Okay, cool. They brought in Weller, of all people, to play the main character. He was not super well known at this time, however, he had that unique talent. He was someone who wasn't well known and didn't have a big name, but had skill. He was in Buckaroo Banzai, which bombed, but was very well received. They also got in Rob Bottin? I'm not actually sure how to pronounce his name. You probably don't recognize the name. He's the guy who helped work on the visual effects thing and, of course, helped design the suit. He did work on John Carpenter's The Thing, as in, monster design and makeup design, prosthetics, that kind of thing. They also brought in Moni Yakim. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that right either. It was hard to even find information about this guy. He was in charge of movement training, and he was the one who helped try to figure all this stuff out. Now, I'm bringing up all of this. I'm going down this huge list because I want to explain what I have mentally started thinking of as the MCU effect. Now, I got to explain that because that's a terrible name. That's why I haven't actually codified that as a name yet. The idea is, one of Marvel's big approaches with the MCU is seek out talent. They literally sent out talent scouts in the same way that a sports team would. And those talent scouts would find writers and set designers and makeup artists and visual effects producers and digital effects teams. They would find directors, they'd find actors. They would find all the people involved in filmmaking who were up-and-comers or didn't have a lot going for them, but showed promise and showed potential. And they'd bring those people in, and they'd make good films, or at least what some people would consider to be good films, including me, by the way. And it's a great approach. And it's not done all that often, because most of the time when that happens, it happens by accident. like in this film. If you're paying attention, we've got Edward Neumeier, we've got Michael Miner, Paul Verhoeven, Peter Weller doing the main character, and we've got I still don't know how to pronounce that. All of these people are very talented people who are very good at their craft and would go on to have fairly successful careers after this. But for the most part, were relatively unknown up until this film's release. Hence the idea. This film even had a similar problem to Star Wars Solo, a Solo movie? Solo, a Star Wars Story, which we covered earlier this year. They got to the point where they were having so many issues they had to just halt production, and that's expensive. They didn't halt production for days or weeks or months like they did with Solo, ballooning the budget to absolutely ridiculous proportions, but they did halt production. The biggest issue is they were having trouble getting the actual suit work. This, by the way, is why the approach I just mentioned of getting talented but unconnected people together actually has happened quite a few times historically and usually doesn't work. Because all it takes is one thing going wrong and the finances go bad and that causes the plug to be pulled. Usually. What ended up happening is Weller actually reached out personally to Joachim, who the two had developed a rapport as they were developing the movements for the suit. Weller got into the suit. Joachim worked with him with it for like a couple hours, something like that, during a lunch break. And when they came back, they had developed an entirely new motion for how he would move around on the set, the style you see in the actual film. This effectively salvaged this film in its entirety, because now they could actually do exactly what they were supposed to do. You're probably thinking, hang on, Lore, why were they already filming before they had the suit? Well, as I don't think I've really explained properly enough, as with most filmmaking, a lot of this wasn't really designed in advance and prepped in advance. Mr. Rob, I'm going to give up on his last name. Rob was the guy who was designing the suit, and they kept redesigning it and refixing it and re-enabling it and then de-enabling it, and then you know how it is. You know how it is. If you've ever done any kind of creative work, and the customer says, hey, can you change this? Hey, can you change this? Over and over and over and over and over. That's basically what was happening. What's funny is, by all accounts, his original design and the finished design were actually quite close to each other, as they just kind of gave up on all the other aesthetics they were going for and just said, fine, screw it, do the original. But the point is, that delayed things. Hence why they couldn't actually film any of the actual RoboCop scenes until the moment at which they brought it on the set, and that's when they had issues, and that's when they had to bring Joachim back in. Sense make? I'm explaining all of this because this is just a huge series of issues which lead to the creation of this film, which then leads to another big problem, although by several accounts this was effectively deliberate. They filmed the whole film except for Murphy's death. Then they went to Orion and said, hey, we're out of money. So, would you like us to release the film? Or, hang on, hear me out. You could give us a bit of a boost in our budget, and we can go ahead and film the Murphy's death scene. Again, by several accounts, this was a deliberate tactic, because they wanted to not have to worry about the budget on the death scene. Several people said it was the most important scene of the film, and it is. So they really wanted to put the money into that scene, and they did. It's a good scene, so credit to them. It was also the most expensive scene of the film, although the construction of the suits, because they made several, probably qualifies as the actual biggest budgetary expense. Thankfully, this film turned out to be worth it. $40 million net profit, which is pretty damned good for the time and for a brand new franchise and for a whole lot of people who were effectively untested. So credit to them on that. So we bring in Kurtwood Smith. Actually, before we go any further, I want to mention something about method acting. I don't want to say I'm against method acting. It's just, method acting usually sucks. Especially for the people actually working on the film or the TV show or whatever it is. Method acting, for those of you not aware, is usually, it's actually a complex thing, but it's usually used as a way to insist that you have to be in character on or off camera. And that's usually where the problem lies. You could say that's an advantageous thing, because that way you're never going to screw up and say the wrong lines, which has happened several times. Like someone will walk up and say, Bob! And they lower their head because Bob is the name of the actor, not the character. And they're like, hang on. So they get into character all the time. But the catch is, you need to have a working relationship with the people making the film, not just the actors who are going to be on the set with you. You need to be able to be the actor who is getting direction from your cameraman, who's getting direction from your director, who's getting your marks right, who is talking to your costume people, and so forth and so on. So Weller was big on method acting. He had to stop that after a few weeks because it was just getting in the way of the shoot. Nobody was putting up with it at all. Anyways, Kurtwood Smith. Sorry, I was reminded of that because Kurtwood Smith reportedly was just like, oh, whatever. It just avoided Weller entirely. Kurtwood Smith was brought in. He starts acting. He wasn't told until after the film was already filmed that he was being deliberately based off of a good, wonderful, kind. He was based off of Himmler. Yeah. Hence the overly sadistic nature and the cruelty and the willingness to sacrifice. He was designed to be like that, which is funny because that was kind of a stretch for Smith, especially at the time. Anywho, so he shows up, and he's evil. We have a little bit of an intro scene. Let me actually cover this first. There's 3 news sequences that play throughout the course of the film. First, we find out that South Africa now has nuclear arms and is totally willing to use it against anyone that happens to go into the area. They bought that from France, I believe it was. Then we find out that there's a space station which had a power failure leading to some artificial gravity issues. Then we hear about how you can get an artificial heart on credit, and don't worry, it comes with a warranty. Then we find out about the fact that a local company now owns the local police station. One of the weird things about this film, and it's what I've mentally thought of as the GTA 4 effect from Grand Theft Auto, it's really obvious in how subtle it is. Or it's really subtle about how obvious it is, however you want to think of that. Because it boils down to the same thing. What we see is, ha-ha, but then you think about it. Nukes in South Africa, which they actually bought from another country, which says all you need to know about that, just in a nutshell, right there. That the fact that you could just go out and purchase nuclear weapons and then be prepared to use them. By the way, this film came out in 1987, for a little bit of context on that. Then we have the fact that there's a power failing in the space station. Now, that by itself is just kind of okay. In fact, honest point, I wouldn't be surprised if most of you didn't even think about that. Until you see the next scene where they offer warranties on a heart transplant. In the off chance you don't know what that means, a warranty is if something goes wrong under these specific circumstances, we'll give you a free replacement. For your heart, which has something go wrong with it, almost as if it wasn't designed to actually be something that lasts and is useful long term, instead being designed to be as cheap as possible, thus needing something like a warranty. And now the space station makes a whole lot more sense, doesn't it? Keep that in mind, too. Then we talk about the company owning the cops. That's the really obvious one. That's just segueing into the film proper. The next one, we find out that there's this big Mexican crisis in Acapulco. And there's actually a war going on down there. In fact, we find out that the rebels blew up the air station. That's the wrong word. Airport? We'll go with airport. And one person's like, oh, I was going to take a vacation there. That sucks. Oh, well. We then find out that there's a board game called Nukem, which looks a lot like a styled-up game of Battleship. But the entire point of the game, as we are told, is nuke them before they nuke you. And so you have to have, like, excuse to nuke the other players. And they're all like, you're threatening my borders. You didn't actually disarm your nukes. And we're all dead. Then, we have an advert for the 6000 SUX. This is actually referenced earlier in the film. I'm just doing all 3 adverts now, even though they're spaced out throughout the film. And it's based on an Oldsmobile, I want to say, something like that. But it's got the American standard of 8.2 miles to the gallon. On the off chance you are not from the States and don't know how far a mile is and don't know how much a gallon is, allow me to just put that into perspective. My car gets close to 40 miles per gallon. Now, I have a decent car, but my car was also built in 1995. 30-ish miles per gallon is considered decent. I would call it average. Anything below that and you're getting into, okay. And it's pretty easy to go above that, too, especially if you're doing highway driving. Although some cars have the thing where they use the brake energy in order to help charge the battery, in order to lower the mileage while you're going through the city. So there's a whole thing. But 8? That is awful. To put it into slightly more perspective, I would literally have to go through a full gallon of gas twice to reach my sister's house to visit her. So that's 4 gallons of gas just to go there and back. Anyways, but then things get funny. There's a space station incident. Apparently there was a mishap, and this beam of death from the Star Wars program shoots... It wasn't actually the space station, it's something else, but it shoots out beams of unholy death which kill many, many people, including former presidents. You could take that in one of two possible ways. They're not mutually exclusive, so I could see this being both. Way number 1, someone's been using that to assassinate former political enemies. And we know that political assassination is kind of normal in this setting, so whatever. I like option 2 better. I don't know what to call that. Incompetence? No. The lowest common... the lowest bidder. There we go. That's what we'll call that. It sounds like, just like with everything else in this film, they decided to make it on the cheap, with the cheapest possible parts. So the giant death laser in space was made in the exact same way that that heart was earlier, that the space station was earlier, and that ED-209 is in this very film. So, sorry, don't worry, we'll fix it. We'll fix it in post. 25 years. Anyways, yay. So we get some good exposition right off the bat after that. We see the cop station. There's been a large series of transfers of cops from other areas to this district, which is also known as the worst criminally run district in the area. We also find out later that this particular district is one that is actually being specifically hammered by Clarence on behalf of Jones. Now, all of that is stuff we find out later, but the pieces are laid early on as we find out about the transfers and about cops dying. It's also so common for cops to die here that they already mention, as usual, this is how the funeral arrangements, and as usual, any donations go to this guy who's already in charge of dealing with helping widows of cops because it's that normal. Later in the film, they mention losing 5 cops in one night. So we get a good idea of exactly how bad this is pretty quickly. The next thing that happens is we get Lewis's intro. Now, this is actually kind of cool. I like Lewis, by the way, but I think the intro helps to encapsulate why in a nutshell. Some guy's like, as he's resisting arrest, so she beats the ever-living crap out of him, then takes off her helmet and reveals she's a woman. Now, I know that sounds like a strange statement because most people watching it nowadays are like, well, of course she's a woman. But at the time, it was actually deliberately designed with both the helmet and the hair and the shots, the camera angles they use, to make it look like you couldn't tell that was a woman until she took off her helmet. You can kind of see why they would want to push that in 1987, but the point remains. Anywho, so then they get in their super futuristic cop cars. Ford Tauruses. Wow. I actually had a Taurus myself for a while. Worst car I've ever had, no joke. I had a whole Crown Vic, which was better than that Ford Taurus. God, that was a piece of junk. Fell apart on me over and over and over, and literally cost me more in repairs than to buy the car itself. Now, I don't think they did that on purpose. In fact, I'm almost positive they didn't, because the actual director's track mentioned that they did that because it looked futuristic. So, nevertheless, the idea of the Ford Taurus being the official car of the cops amuses the crap out of me, given how much of a piece of crap it is. In universe, I mean, obviously in real life, well, that's a whole other thing. I'm going to try to leave real life as much out of this as I possibly can, if that's cool. Cool. So, then we have the big display of ED 209. We mentioned there's delays. We mentioned there's budget errors. We have the best directed scene in the entire film. And then the ED-209 loses it and starts shooting the guy because it can't recognize that he put down the gun. I've actually seen a few friends of mine who have themselves perused Reddit threads who have talked to me about this film. It's, what, 4 jumps away at this point? Nevertheless, I like the idea that's posited. Programming is a finicky thing, which doesn't really... a human brain can take... The way this was described to me once is a human mind is smooth. It's a smooth curve. There's billions of data points on this line. And so it can be malleable if you're somewhere on the line. Cool. Programming is like maybe 5 or 6 points forming a very rough curved line. If the actual data is anywhere off this, even by a minuscule amount, the programming doesn't really know what to do with it, so it just kind of defaults, right? Now, obviously, we've been getting better about that over the years, but I'm sure any of you out there are probably going, yeah. Anybody who's dabbled in programming? Yeah. I mean, I've dabbled in programming too. Although I'm more of a code design person. But anyways, so the theory here is that because he threw the weapon down, it didn't register that as him removing the weapon. In short, think of the code something like this. Been threatened by weapon? Check. Give warning. Now we're in a state of this is an enemy who will be dispatched unless weapon is removed. Do note that the removal thing is the trigger, not the absence of the weapon. There's no rescan. There's no additional check to see if the person still has the weapon. Only checking if it does the trigger, which is putting down the gun. So he never puts down the gun, therefore it's never triggered that he disarms, therefore... Now, this is a good scene in its own right. This isn't the best scene I reference. I actually want to circle back to that in a minute. But this scene, again, really helps to encapsulate the world we're in. He dies. By the way, his name was Kenny. No joke. His name was Kenny. Anyways, Kenny dies. You bastard. And nobody really cares. Even the old man who's upset about this is upset because of the fact that the program doesn't work. Not because a man just got killed into a brutal freak accident in the middle of the room. The people who most care about it are the extras in the background who probably are just being told, act concerned. And that's about it. Everyone else is just, okay. Even Morton, who is probably one of the nicer executives, and Johnson, his friend, don't really seem to give much of a crap. They're more thinking about it in terms of their own advancement. But I said I'd circle back to that scene, and I want to, because this is why I like Verhoeven in a nutshell. He knows how to do fun and interesting things with his shots. Follow me with this, because this is going to be interesting. So I decided to pick this particular, because it'll be really obvious against the green screen. You should be able to see this no matter where I put it. So here's the camera, okay? Now the camera's facing this way. There, I'll just hold it up right. The camera's facing, it doesn't matter. Camera's going this way. We've got this set. And the camera is pulling out of the elevator and following these two people as they talk, going this way. And as they then get settled into their shot, we see that there's 2 other people who have already started moving in the opposite direction. Camera shifts and relocks onto them and follows them back down the same path we just went. This is all still one contiguous shot. They then sit down, and the camera swivels around loosely to settle onto the old man, who starts speechifying. While he's speechifying, the camera very slowly and carefully shifts further and further out, so that when he reaches the point in his dialogue where he starts talking about the plan for Delta, the camera can swivel slightly, and then we have the model come into view of the renovations of the city that he wants to put in. All of this is one shot, and it's brilliant. It's really good camera work. It's legitimately good cinematography. I don't even want to know how many takes that took to accomplish. It looks bloody brilliant. Speaking of that, there's also some good transitions in this film, too. Sorry. My lips are really dry. I should just take a drink is what I should do. Remember, get your super seltzer water 5,000. It's got what plants crave. As Morton and Johnson are walking away, they get into one of those exterior glass elevators. You know the kind, right? And the shot goes out of its way. The camera's up and above them. So it's looking down towards ground view as the elevator's descending. And they talk about things and they talk about plans, and they're going to go ahead with the RoboCop plan, which means they just need one patsy. Remember, one of the reasons they've been deliberately bringing people in here and encouraging crime is in order to try and get someone who would die in order to be turned into RoboCop. Now, as they say this, the camera then shifts. I can't believe I never caught this before. The camera now shifts. Y'all gonna be watching this like, duh, Lore, all of us caught that years ago, and I'm just the idiot who didn't actually get with the program. But we cut to Weller, who's having a moment with Lewis. They're just chatting. But as he's chatting, there's a giant glass skyscraper in the background, and there was no elevator going up and down. That would have been a nice touch. But it's clearly the same building, and now it's looking up in the direction that they were as as the camera kind of swivels down like this. It's just stuff like that which helps really make this film better than it otherwise would be. Oh, don't mistake me, the script's nice, the acting's good, but some of that camera work is just gorgeous. I didn't like the music. This is a good time to mention that. The music does that thing, which I don't know how to describe, but it's like something that's trying to be epic and failing at it. You probably know what I'm talking about. It's a really big problem in a lot of video games, actually, where they want big, epic, dramatic music, but for whatever reason they fail at it. So it just comes across as weird and weak. Now, obviously, they're not really going for epic in this film, but it's the same problem, right? It's just, okay. In half the scenes, I felt like if they just didn't use the music at all, it actually would have worked out better. But that's all I have to say about that. Moving on. So we have this excellent transition. We also find out that Ray Wise is working with Clarence. You're probably thinking, who the hell is Ray Wise? I imagine most people don't recognize him, and indeed, I've only seen him in one other thing, when he played the U.S. President in Command & Conquer Red Alert 2. I don't give a wooden nickel about your legacy. You call them off. You know we'll retaliate. The film, I mentioned the overt subtlety thing. As they're chasing this getaway van, which is filled with people with shotguns who just robbed a bank or whatever, they get on the PCB or whatever, and they say, that's probably the wrong acronym, the thing that connects them to the rest of the cops on the radio. And they say, hey, can we get some backup? Yeah, it'll be 15 minutes to your backup. Okay, let's go. We have a big, action sequence. Everything's cool. Then they successfully manage to follow them to the hideout. And they check for where that backup. And they find out that backup is 20 minutes away now. More than basically, I'd say, anything else in the entire film, that tiny little tidbit really sells for me just how bad the things have gotten within this precinct. Yeah. Although, again, this is a point they hammer in over and over, as I've already pointed out 3 examples of. So, Clarence. I haven't talked about Clarence much yet. He's established early on as very violent, very abusive, and not giving a damn about his employees. He's also mentioned to be relatively small scale. It's just he has the backing of someone strong. This is interesting because this actually makes perfect sense. Someone like him would just be another gang leader, another thug on the street, with a few other thugs following him, if not for the fact that he's got backing. Because he has backing, he's able to accomplish a lot more that others are not. He also does have a brain. Excuse me, yawn attack. He does have a brain. I only got like 5 hours last night. But, because he talks about investing. Emil talks about investing, which is just, God, So we're going to steal money from a bank, and then we're going to use that to make products, and then we're going to sell those products, and we're going to make way more money. The reason that sets them apart, the thing that makes them smart, is because the local thugs want to enter capitalism. I'm not even bringing real life into that. That's just how it is in the film. I'd buy that for $0.25. Yes, I do get the reference. Thank you. So, they follow them to the thing, and the one and only scene that actually pisses me off in the whole film happens. Lewis, who I remind you is her establishing scene is that she's a badass, And I'll talk more about her later, but basically she's kind of awesome, except for this one time where this guy's like, hey, you don't mind if I zip up, do you? And she just cannot resist looking at his dick. Why? Now, what's funny is it would be really easy to restructure this so it's not as big of a deal. Because all you'd have to do is have it so that, she goes to... Okay, actually, it would take some serious restructuring now that I'm actually thinking about that. But my point is, if you want to look at his dick, at least bind his hands or get out of punching range, then take a good look, okay? But instead, what happens is she looks and she gets hit and knocked over the edge and knocked out, and that's why Murphy dies. That's the restructuring. We'd have to get her out of the action somehow so that Murphy would die. But anyways, also, the guy who knocks her out then doesn't do anything to actually finish her off, which is also stupid. So that's two stupid points. It's one of those because plot moments. We need Murphy to die, we need her to live. And so we need to separate them, we need to make it so they can't get in contact with each other, we need to make sure that nobody kills her, but we need to make sure that they all gang up on him, and then she immediately afterwards gets a hold of him so that she can get him out of there. If these pieces aren't in place, the premise doesn't work. It's just, I felt like that section could have used a little more massaging on the script. Anyways, getting on with it. I wonder what it would feel like to be tortured to death with a shotgun. Earlier in the film, Kenny gets shot by ED-209. What did you think of that? Like, what tone do you think was in that? I'm going to wait here because there's plenty of valid answers, and I'm not even going to give you my answer because that doesn't matter. What's your answer? I know what the intended answer was. It was intended to be funny. I've actually talked about this before when it comes to comedy. Repeating jokes, right? So you do the gag, and then you repeat the gag, and that gets a chuckle. Then you repeat the gag a bit more, and that just kind of gets an eyebrow raise. Then you go, there's two more steps past this, or technically an infinite loop if you want to talk about it. The next step is it's repeated so long that it kind of circles back around to being funny again, and the step after that is it officially gets old. And like I said, sometimes it can loop between getting old and being funny and old and funny again. It depends. But that's the general progression. There's like a really weird sweet spot where you've made it go on so long that it it has stopped, and then started being funny again. This was the intent with this, that he's absolutely being gibbed to the point of not even being a recognizable human being anymore. And then someone calls for paramedics, right? Yeah, because they're going to manage that, right? The reason I bring that up is because that was obviously the intent with that scene. With Murphy's death, the intent was not to be comedic. It is intended to be horrific. They are trying to show that this man is being tortured to death with shotguns. I couldn't even help the chuckle in the middle there because they're just you have to laugh at something so ludicrous, don't you? So he dies? Depending on if you believe the parallels in this film or not, which I'm not even getting into because, to be perfectly frank, if I wanted to pull up every single Christ parallel in fiction, I would just mention 90% of them and then move on. It's a really common thing, is what I'm trying to say here. But whether you believe the parallel or not, the intent was that he died, but then the cybernetics were sufficient to actually bring him back from the dead, hence the parallel. Whether you think that's true or whether you think he was just, recovered from near death, that's up to you. It does change things a little bit, but not to the point where it actually changes the tone of the film, in my opinion. Either way, he goes through hell, and they bring in the real ER team. That's a good bit. But what is a much better bit, and I wish I had more to say about it, is the first-person perspective of being converted into this cybernetic form. This primarily robotic form, actually. This is pretty much straight-up Cyborg from DC. There's like his head and his brain and his heart and maybe like a few other things, but otherwise, he's a robot. Seeing it from the first person, seeing them talk about him, seeing them mention wiping his memory, hearing them discussing what they want to do with his arm and how they're going to get this working, and they're all celebrating because it's working, and he gets the big kiss on the face, and then we get to the reveal. It is beautiful in how disjointedly horrific it is, and it's one of the better scenes in the film, in my opinion. I gotta mention something here, by the way. Morton was written to be just as bad as Jones. That was the design intent. Then they decided to get Miguel Ferrer to play him. Now, I might as well just call this the... oh, God, I can't think of his name all of a sudden. You gotta be kidding me. I hate it when this happens. We might as well just call this the Mark Lamo effect, because of how often it is related to him. But what several people have said is that Morton's character is a lot more sympathetic and positively portrayed than most of the other executives. Whether you agree with that or not is up to you. Again, it was clearly not the intent of the directors and the writers. But the reason I bring it up is, again, I've already given my theory as to why. I think it's because of the actor. Because he has a natural charm to him, and he does try to portray himself in a certain manner. So even while he is not a good person, he's certainly a better person than, say, the incredibly hardline evil Richard Jones, for example. So, at 30 minutes in, we get the big reveal. You notice they mentioned the 3 objectives, and Objective 4, which is classified. So he's a much better shot now. You notice they actually showed how good of a shot he was earlier, which was to say not very. And I point that out because now he is a substantially better shot now that he's got the programming and whatnot. So I suppose that makes sense. He causes a ridiculous amount of collateral damage. He nearly destroys the... Oh my God, I can't think of any names right now. The place where you go to buy... the convenience store. He nearly destroys the convenience store in stopping the robbery. And then, of course, he goes after the 2 men who are harassing the woman. Well, there's a big poster, a billboard in the background of Delta City and how it's going to be awesome. As I said, overt in its subtlety. This is a good time to mention something. There are accounts circling around that in many ways this film was actually inspired by Judge Dredd. The comics, obviously. I don't know if that's true. In fact, I wasn't even able to corroborate it. I'm only mentioning it because this sequence of events most feels like something Dredd would do. Because then he decides to go after the former councilman, Miller. And he goes through and he smashes through the wall and he takes him out and kills him. And everything's cool. Quick side note. Miller is up there and he's deranged and he's psychotic. He's already shot a guy. So he's already guilty of murder. And he insists on, getting all sorts of things, including a nice car and a nice place. He wants a better office and he wants the city to pay for it. Okay. I want to remind you that this is the former councilman or city councilor, whatever the heck his frickin' title was. It doesn't matter because it's an elected position. Someone's elected this man to be in charge. And when he was voted out of office, he snapped and went all this on people. Little things, it's little things that help you to appreciate the dystopia. Anyways, this is when we also finally get to see Mr. Jones's character well established. Played by Ronnie Cox, who is awesome in a lot of his roles. Although, funnily enough, before this he played kinder, gentleman kind of characters. And from this film onward, he just kind of shifted all of a sudden to suddenly being the bad guy. I mean, they even pulled this 5 years later in Star Trek The Next Generation. They pulled him in for Chains of Command. But anyways, back on topic. 25 years. He had a contract with the military. Replacement parts. Renovations. Who cares if it works? This is the most obvious point in the entire film. This goes back to what I mentioned about the heart pump and the warranty, the space station and the space laser, the fact that the cars barely work, the Taurus. This is it being said straight up, and the off chance you haven't picked up on every other thing up until this point. We don't care about making a good product that will last. We care about making a product that is good enough that we can then keep selling to you. Priority. It's the priority list. I'm going to use the dumbest analogy I've ever come up with for this, but I've already done it. I'm prepped for this, so hear me out. I have a bit of carrots right here. This is my snack food when I'm working. And I just kind of keep it here. I keep it in the bin. It helps keep the fruit flies away, and it also retains the moisture. If carrots dry out, then they tend to suck. What I do every morning is I go pull out a bag, and I rinse and wash, and I inspect the carrots to make sure no gushy ones are in, or some of the ones, they've got that slightly rotten smell. Inspecting and making sure they're in there. Now, I have a very busy day ahead of me, and I have an enormous amount of work to do. You could then say that I would be forgiven for just every morning rinsing the bag really quick, tossing into the bin, and calling it good. That is not what I do. What I do is I make sure that each carrot is fine as I'm going through, which takes longer. Now, what does this have to do with anything? Priority list. Priority list is you establish the first priority first. Once the first priority is dealt with, once it is something that is acceptable and is covered, you move to the second priority. Once that one's done, you move to the third, and so forth and so on. If my first priority was speed, just getting it over with as quickly as possible, then what I would do is I would accept the possibility that bad carrots would seep through, or that I would get a bad batch, or that it's not properly rinsed. Because those things, while they matter, are lower priority than speed. So I just get it over with. And you see how this relates to the film. Because these people obviously are most heavily prioritizing making money, specifically making money now, as opposed to making money long term. Although you could argue that that's not true either, because the way they're presented, this is a very sharkish situation. It's just, I don't want to get into the greater economics of trying to deliberately bilk your customers for 25 years for some product that doesn't actually work. Let's not get into that. That is actually a topic. So these guys, they just want as many carrots in the bag, or from the bag into the thing as quickly as possible. They don't care about specifics. Now, I would mention that this is one of the ways that distinguishes Morton from Jones, from Richard Jones. Because Richard Jones just cares about the money, and Morton wants to actually make a good product, and then make the money. Hence the priority list. Both of them care about the money. Both of them care about advancing their position. But what's above that changes. Sense make? Now, what's funny is, this is when I have to talk about something. RoboCop spawned a franchise. There's 2 films after this, then there's the animated thing, and then there's that other thing we're not going to talk about. There's a couple games, and then there's the reboot in 2014 or whatever it was. I have seen some of that, and I have not liked any of it. I did some looking into, specifically RoboCop 2 and 3, with regards to this film in particular. They actually brought in Frank Miller to write RoboCop 2, if you believe that. And I have decided to completely eject all of that from concerns of canon and continuity when it comes to discussing this film. 2 big reasons why. First of all, I don't like them. Feel like I already made that point clear. But second, and arguably more importantly, they retcon things that change some of the actual themes and points of this film. And in so doing, it changes some of the impact of things. Like, say, RoboCop actually being a colossal waste of money and effort to the point where he's actually completely financially unfeasible. He is more effective than ED-209, but he's actually a worse product in almost every way. But that's only because of the sequels. So you see how that does kind of change the dynamic a bit and changes some of the underlying concepts and themes. You can decide to agree or disagree, and in fact, as ever, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Obviously, I'm not considering the recent film, because why would I? Moving on. So, we find out the memory wipe isn't total. Morton refuses to pull the project. After all, he is interested in promotion, remember. He does actually want to get promoted, get to that executive washroom, crawl his way up the ranks. The gas station, he's a better shot. I mentioned this earlier. He actually manages to effortlessly shoot a motorcycle that is speeding away from him. Although he doesn't quite save the gas station, so that didn't work out all that well. Then we have the He Remembers Himself sequences, which we've actually already started. These sequences are probably the worst overall sequences in the film for me. Because it's like, okay, we get it. He's remembering who he is. Okay, I get it. He's remembering who he is. Oh my God, they're still hammering this point in. And it's funny because I do like it when a film hammers a point in properly, but I feel like this was just a little bit misstepped. It goes on a little bit too long for something that wasn't really necessary, in my opinion. There's this wonderful bit later on where he says, I feel them, but I don't remember them. That, for me, that one line and Weller's performance of that line sells this entire concept better for me than this entire 10-minute stretch of film. Side note, automated house sellers. Why don't you make me an offer? That's something about that really horrifies me. It's hard to really put a finger on it. You just leave a house, set up the auto house spot, or maybe it's always there and you just turn it on when you leave. Which is worse? So Morton is doing hookers and blow. And then grenade, very apropos. Ha ha, I see what you did there. And this immediately cuts to the manufacturing plant where they are making cocaine. Again, good transitions, good camera work. I've already mentioned this. We also see Clarence finally actually act on what he said he was going to do earlier. He's going to try and muscle in on a business in order to try and make it and make money, and then he's going to go legit and blah, 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 blah. This then leads to Mook mentality as the big shootout happens, which apparently was actually nowhere near as interesting originally, but because they had so many issues with the fake guns jamming, they only got a second or two or three of footage of any given shot that was actually usable. So that's why the shots are bam, 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 which increases the pace of the scene, which actually works really well. Coincidence. Mook mentality. Okay, you're this big death doom, okay? You're Superman, or you're Iron Man, or you're RoboCop, whatever, right? And you're like, stomp, stomp, stomp. And there's like 30 guys, and they're all trying to bring you down. It has always amused me, the idea that one of those people is just thinking, I'm going to be the one of the 29 other guys around here. I'm going to be the one that actually managed to get a bullet through that armor. And I'm not going to aim for the face. That would be ridiculous. His chin, well, we all know Weller has an armored chin, so that wouldn't work at all. But we're going to make something happen. It's cool. It's cool. The thing is, hear me out for a second. If video games have taught me anything, it's that you should always stomp a turtle. But if the second thing they've taught me is the fact that it's entirely possible that that last mook will actually kill you. This has happened to me a few times when I've been streaming, like, say, a Spider-Man game. And I'm fighting, like, 15 random guys. And I'm like, okay, I got this guy, and 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 they're hurting me, and I'm running out of heals, and there's, like, one guy left, and he kills me. And I'm just sitting here thinking, that guy gets a promotion right there. Random dude 37 managed to kill superhero X, right? Because that's always how that ends up working out, right? Anyways, I'm sorry. Segue off. So then we find out about what Directive 4 is. Dun, dun, dun. And we find out that he was behind everything. Dun, dun, dun. And we find out they're super evil. Dun, dun, dun. And then ED-209 shows up. Question. Why is ED-209 so popular? It's basically the symbol for the franchise, even more than RoboCop himself. ED-209, in a format, even showed up in the remake. And ED-209 is actually, if I'm remembering correctly, the last boss, or at least the functional last boss of the NES game, which I actually played really, really long time ago. That's why I'm kind of vaguing around on this one, because my memories aren't that good, guys. I remember Ninja Gaiden better because I've replayed it since then. But why is he so popular? Well, I think there's two big reasons for this. And I think these are pretty well connected to each other. On the one hand, it looks cool. It does. I've always loved the Chicken Walker concept, and I know I'm not the only one. Quick, what's your favorite Mech Warrior mech? Just off the top of your head. From Battletech? Now, I bet there's at least a 50% chance that anybody who even knows what I'm talking about just mentioned one of the Chicken Walkers. You know, like the classic Timberwolf, for example. Daishi, by the way. Or the Crab. Crab's good. So it just looks cool. Big guns, yeah. The other reason is that it is the symbol of the entire film. More so than anything else in this entire film, it encapsulates everything that I have been talking about this entire time, and everything the film has been hammering in about that concept of the lowest common bidder. Bidder. B-I-D-D-E-R. It's a piece of junk. It's big and flashy, and it has crap programming, and it has a giant obvious weak spot, and it can't deal with stairs. Now, in the interest of fairness, something like ED-209 can actually be used properly. You set it up as like an artillery, a mobile artillery kind of a thing, or maybe like just big, heavy fire support, or maybe suppressing fire. There's military uses for this kind of a thing. But you could see why this thing is so woefully out of date and outclassed by something like RoboCop, who has adaptability on his side. Again, stairs. No offense to the people. By the way, the stop motion on ED-209 is actually surprisingly good. I was really impressed with what they did with it. But anyways, keep that in mind, by the way, because the effects in this whole film have actually been top-notch. I want you to remember that, because it's going to come up later. So, this then leads to the cops trying to kill him. And he just starts enduring a hailstorm of fire. Credit the movie for this point. First, he has the Directive 4 attempt to shut him down. Then he tries to get killed by Edie. Then, a bunch of cops just unload a hailstorm of metal onto him. After a while, that kinetic energy is going to start making some problems, no matter how good that titanium is. Oh, excuse me. So I do like how it is bringing him down. And of course, he doesn't want to fight back because why would he? Ignoring the fact that I don't think he can under his directives, there's the fact that he doesn't want to kill cops. Point in the movie's favor, by the way, several cops visibly protest this action and leave. Refuse to be a part of this. He's a cop. We can't do that. Are you crazy? And that leads me to Lewis. She's a good cop. She is. If we had more people like her in the service, I think the world would legitimately be a better place. In real life. She cares. She's perceptive. She's competent. She's durable. She gives enough of a damn about her own, but also doing her job. That's a key distinction. I really don't want to get into real-life politics too much, so let's just keep this within the confines of the film. But even within the confines of the film, there's a lot of tribalism going on with the police force. Now, this is externally pushed because of the whole setting up the situation thing I mentioned earlier. They want the cops to strike, right? But some of the cops have the mentality that we're cops, we're the same tribe, screw everyone else. And that's why they strike, leaving everyone to just fend for themselves, which leads to chaos, of course. But some of the cops don't. Some of the cops care about other people. Some of the cops actually care about doing their job. Not because they get paid for it, but because there's a legitimate, actual, good service to be presented by good cops. And Lewis is probably the example of this. This is one of the reasons she gets so much screen time, in my opinion, is because of the fact that we needed to see what a good cop looks like when they're not surrounded by metal. This, of course, then lends another layer to it. She is totally with Murphy. I mentioned she's observant. She identifies Murphy relatively quickly and easily, even though she had only known him for 1 day, less than a full day. Their first day interacting with each other, granted, went pretty badly, and you could certainly understand why it would leave a mark on her memory. I don't want to oversell this. But still, she IDs him. And despite the fact of that one interaction, that one patrol that they had together, she cares about him because he's a good cop too. And good cops tend to gravitate towards each other. Hell, good people tend to gravitate towards each other. And I don't mean anything romantic here. There's not a hint of romance here, nor should there be. In fact, one of the things I like most about this film is Lewis's gender is completely irrelevant. You could make Lewis a guy or a girl and it would change nothing. I like that. She's just a character, as she should be. She's awesome, and I'm with it, but it's not the Voyager problem with Janeway, right? She then, just to further add to this, there's this wonderful bit where she actually is shot up multiple times and then manages to get the big gun, the Cobra Death. I wrote it down. What was the name of that stupid thing? The Cobra, I swore I wrote it down. There it is, Cobra Assault Cannon, and shoots, the President of the United States up there. So the Soviets win. And she's also the one who runs down Clarence, and you get the idea. She is equally a part of the final battle, or what is effectively the final battle, as he is, as she should be. So, let's rewind a little bit here. I wanted to talk about her there, because that's kind of the climax of her scenes. Barbara You're probably thinking, who the heck is Barbara? It's the name of a random secretary. And Kurtwood Smith walks up, Clarence walks up, and he just flirts openly with her. That's his wife. That's Kurtwood Smith's real-life wife at that point in history. I just had to share that because that amused the heck out of me. Anyways, he goes in and he talks with Dick, and the two talk back and forth. What I find most interesting about this exchange is that what actually convinces Clarence to work with Jones is a bribe, a reaching out with a hand rather than a gun. I only point that out because that's his approach pretty much the whole film. There are very few times when he feels the need to use the hammer. And when he does, he uses it rather decisively. There is one exception to that, and I'll get to that in a minute. It's not that far from now, don't worry. We're almost done talking about this wonderful, excellent film that, by the way, if you haven't seen, I really recommend you make the moment and watch this film. So, they go out. They start causing chaos. They've got the Cobra assault cannon I already mentioned. They blow up the car, because why not? Botten and Verhoeven had a huge clash on makeup, but they made up over it and actually worked together on Total Recall later, so that's cool. He has that line. Now, I already mentioned how great this line is. I feel them, but I don't remember them. However, as a long-standing Kingdom Hearts fan, I just had to comment on the fact that he can feel them, but not remember them. I'm not even going to explain that joke. That amused the hell out of me. This film and Terminator, I think, really started the 90s obsession with abandoned factories. In fact, from what I understand, there's like one abandoned factory that a huge number of these films were all filmed in. I could be wrong about that, don't quote me, but I remember reading about that quite some time ago. Either way, we got this big abandoned factory thing, and that's neat and all. You know why I like it in this film? Unemployment. Several times throughout this film, we see places where there's only one person working at an entire store, or two people are running a store by themselves, or there's entire sections of stores that are just shut down, or there's a whole factory that's completely abandoned, or a factory that's been completely taken over by a drug dealer who's trying to make cocaine in it. Unemployment. Yikes. Anywho, so we have the final battle with the thugs, with Clarence and his team. Emil gets sludgified by the toxic waste and turns into the Toxic Avenger, and then gets gooshed on Clarence's car as he's driving away. Now, the only reason I'm bringing all that up, well, actually, there's two reasons. First of all, the MPAA actually really wanted to cut that scene, but apparently it was testing so well, they just kind of let it slide, even though it technically wouldn't qualify by the rules at the time. The other reason I want to point out is that's the first scene I ever saw of this entire film when I was a kid. First thing I saw. And I was like, whoa, I don't want to see that movie. Jeez. Ooh, no, thank you. And it took some more time, and my mother, to convince me to finally be like, okay, fine, I'll go ahead and watch this film. Oh, hey, it's actually a good film. Oh, there's the scene again. Okay, we're back to being a good film. But what I'll never forget is that's the first thing I saw, and so then when I watched the film for the first time, I'm just sitting there waiting for it, like anticipating it, because I planned to look away while it was happening. And by the time it happened, I'd forgotten about that because it's right at the end of the film. And so then it happened. I was like, oh, dang it, I forgot. Anyways, moving on. So, big conflict. Lewis is awesome. He manages to kill Clarence. Film's over, right? Kind of feels like it is, isn't it? And here's the thing. In the original drafts of the script, Mr. Jones didn't exist. They felt they needed someone to be kind of behind Clarence, to be the person funding and pulling the strings, the actual villain, the man behind the chair kind of a thing. This is, of course, him, and he does a good job of it, and Mr. Cox does a great job of his presentation, and he's one of the better actors in the film, but my point is, if you really zoom the camera out, you'll notice how most of his scenes are tacked on to existing scenes, or don't really have anything to do with anything other than something that is just there to establish him. Basically something you could insert or remove, and if you removed all of them, it wouldn't really change the flow of the story at all. There's only one big exception to that, and that is Directive 4. That's the one thing that would really require major rewrites in order to remove him from the film. I'm not saying he should be removed. However, the final confrontation, the actual last scene of the film, feels very off to me, and I think this is why. Because everything I just described is why. Because he shows up, effortlessly destroys ED-209 with the Cobra assault cannon, because of course he does, and charges up, says, "Hey." One of the first things he says is, "I cannot, I can't arrest an officer of the company." He says that out loud and overtly. And the old man obviously is paying attention because he then uses that against Dick later. But anyways, so then he goes and he plays the footage about how he had killed him. Johnson, by the way, notice Johnson actually looks really pissed about that. He's the guy who goes, if you don't remember him. Anyway, so he's upset about this, and Dick Jones does the dumbest thing he does in the whole film. He grabs a gun and pulls it on the only guy in the entire room who can fire him. So naturally, what happens? Then he's knocked out of the film, and the worst visual effect of the entire film happens. They actually had a puppet of him, which they kind of filmed plummeting away, kind of a thing. It looks terrible. And normally I let this kind of thing slide, especially for a film that came out in '87. The problem is, most of the other effects of this film are great. Like, actually good, holds up today, great. There's a few exceptions, but for the most part, it's good stuff. That's why it's so glaring. And then it ends on the, "What's your name? My name is Murphy. Cut to credits." The pacing of it is off. The position of it feels weird. The final confrontation barely is a confrontation. It's entirely too tongue-in-cheek. It almost feels like what I would call a wah-wah in terms of story presentation. And I only point all this out because it's just, the rest of the film has just been, really weird way to end the film. Regardless of my struggling through this one, I do hope you guys have enjoyed. I will see you next time.